Okay, guys, excuse me. Thank you. First things first, just a few housekeeping rules as usual. We're not expecting a fire alarm at all, so if the fire alarm does go off, please make your way to the nearest fire exits and assemble near the car park that you passed coming in. Toilets, etc. at each end of the building. Also, if you are called to speak, because of there's still the risk of COVID infection, please use the sterile wipes, etc. that's on the table at the front before you use the mic. Okay? So we've got item 1, apologies for absence, please.
Thank you, Jay. Yes, we've had apologies from Councillor Sharp and Councillor Amjad Iqbal, and Councillor Rush is attending as substitute for Councillor Sharp.
Thank you. Councillor Rush, thank you for stepping in. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Councillor Hiller.
Yes, thank you. Chair, item 5.1, I have a predetermination against the officer's recommendation, so I won't be sitting for that item.
Thank you. Anybody else? No. Item 3 is declaration to make representation as ward councillor. No, none of those. Item 4 then is minutes of previous meetings. This was the previous meeting held on the 22nd of February 2022. Yes, Councillor.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There was a line in there that said about me having a non-pecuniary interest. It was item 5.1. Against that application, item 3. In fact, as I'm married to the person that owns that property, I would suggest that's probably a pecuniary interest rather than a non-pecuniary interest. Could you confirm that?
Yes. Yeah, we agree. Yeah, we'll get that done. Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else? No. So apart from that amendment, is everybody happy that it was a true account? All agreed? Thank you. Item 5, development control and enforcement matters. Item 5.1 relates to the Golden Pheasant, 1 Main Road, Etton, and the application will be presented by Mr. Phil Moore when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman. So, afternoon everybody, my name's Phil Moore. I am one of the team leaders within development management, and I'm going to be presenting this application to you now. So firstly, just to draw members' attention to a letter that was submitted by the applicant a couple of days ago, as he's not able to attend the meeting. He asked for this letter to be read out at the meeting. However, that's not the practice here, so that letter has been included in full in the committee update report. So on to the application itself. So this is a retrospective application, and it involves the retention of 2 linked marquees at the Golden Pheasant pub, which is in Etton. The Golden Pheasant itself is a Grade 2 listed building, and it sits within Etton Conservation Area. So a bit of history. A number of temporary permissions have been granted for marquees on this site since 2001. So the marquees have been there for just over 20 years. And more recently, an application for a permanent permission was refused in 2021, and that was largely due to insufficient information to justify a permanent permission. The current application is for a permanent permission. This time additional information has been submitted in an attempt to overcome the previous reasons for refusal. So the plan that you see in front of you is the location plan. The Golden Pheasant site is quite big actually. It's the entirety of that sort of triangle enclosed by the red line. Next slide please. And this is an aerial view of Etton showing where the Golden Pheasant is in relation to the rest of the village, and it's the sort of orange pin at the bottom of the village there. Next slide please. This is the site plan, and the top right hand part of that plan is the the pub itself, and then to the bottom left are the two marquees. As you can see, there's a large marquee which is linked to a smaller marquee. Next slide, please. And this is slightly more detailed floor plan. The heavier outline is the outline of the Golden Pheasant pub itself. Above that, you can see the large marquee linked to the smaller marquee. The large marquee measures 12 metres by 12 metres and is 5.1 metres in height at its highest point. The smaller marquee, which houses the bar, is 6 metres by 6 metres and 3.9 metres in height. Next slide, please. And there's your elevations. Next slide, please. So on to some photographs. As I said, it's retrospective, so these photographs show the marquees in both close-up and in the wider context. So that's the main marquee. Next slide, please. And this is the smaller bar marquee, which is linked to the larger one. You can just about see the larger one on the right-hand side of the photo. Next slide, please. And now this one shows the two marquees together, and you can just see the edge of the listed Golden Pheasant building on the right-hand side of that picture. Next slide, please. And this is taken from slightly further away, showing the marquees in the context of the Golden Pheasant pub. Next slide, please. Similar photo. This one shows the whole of the frontage of the Golden Pheasant with the marquees to the left. Next slide. Now this is moving slightly round to further to the southwest. Again, you can see the main building itself behind the trees and the marquees on the left. Next slide, please. Now this is a parking plan which has been submitted with the application. One of the reasons for refusal for the previous application was concerns about potential lack of parking. Now this parking plan has been submitted, and may not be immediately obvious, but it shows a fairly substantial car park to the pub itself, but there's also a paddock to the south which can be used for overspill parking. Next slide, please. And this is a view of the paddock, which, as I said, can be used for overspill parking. Next slide, please. And now some further photos. These are just to illustrate what the marquees look like from a bit further away within the context of the wider conservation area. Now this is taken from within the paddock, and you can't actually see them in that view because they're screened by a number of trees, although you can see the Golden Pheasant pub itself. Next slide, please. And that's a similar view, just a bit closer. Next slide. And that is from within or just beyond the car park. Again, you can barely see the marquees from that angle, screened by trees. Next slide, please. A similar view there. Next slide. Now this is looking from the entrance from Glinton Road. Yeah, as you can see in the centre there, the marquee is kind of at the side of the main pub building. Next slide, please. And that one, just slightly moving away from the previous spot. Next slide, please. And again, this one is taken from the car park. Next slide, please. Now some photographs from the road, again shown in its wider context of the conservation area. All of this, everything you can see there in that photograph is within the conservation area. Again, you can just about see the pub, but you can't see the marquees. Next slide, please. And that's again taken from the side of the road. And next one, please. And another one from the side of the road. Next slide, please. And this is the final photograph. This is from the field to the side. Everything to the right, beyond the field, is the conservation area, and you just about glimpse part of one of the marquees there. Bear in mind, this is in the winter. In the summer, that would be screened by leaves. And I think that's the last one in the presentation. So The key issue with this application is, or the key question is there any harm to any of the heritage assets identified, i.e. the listed building and the conservation area, and if so, is the harm outweighed by any public benefits? So very quickly, our evaluation is that yes, there is a degree of harm. It's less than substantial and fairly low down within that category of less than substantial harm. We consider that any harm could be further reduced by some landscaping, tree planting, shrubs, things like that, which will further screen the building and views towards where it can be seen together with the pub. In terms of the benefits, these marquees have been there for 20 odd years, so they are now an established part of the pub business and the viability of that pub. We've had some further information submitted since the previous refusal, which we think justifies a permanent permission, and we feel that it adds to the sustainability of the village, being a local facility. Also, income from it would help to maintain the listed building and give it a guarantee of a long-term future. Additional conditions have been recommended over and above what was on the temporary permissions. These would further restrict music events to 12 events per year, and there's also a condition recommended to help to control parking during large events. So overall, your officers consider that the public benefits do outweigh the limited degree of harm, and therefore a permanent permission is justified in this case. So the recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Excellent, thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Okay, I'll call first, or both, Mr. Bond and Mr. Todd, please. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Just so you know, when you use the mic, it's the button at the bottom, looks like there's a face on it. You press it once to make it work and press it again to turn it off. Also, don't forget to use the wipes just to make sure they are sterile. You'll have 5 minutes between you when you're ready, so when you're the first person to start, we'll then start the clock. Okay, would you also do us a favour and introduce yourself quickly when you first come on the mic so we know who's who? Thank you.
I'm Mark Bond. Dear Chairman and members, thank you for the opportunity for addressing you today. I object to this application. The applicant breached conditions associated with the lapse of consent, including parking, noise and use as a sole lounge through Friday to Sunday with music played all day. Whilst the planning officer recommends approval with additional conditions imposed, I would argue that these are not robust enough given the previous breaches and conditions which have been difficult to enforce against due to the nature of when they have occurred. The previous application was refused because it was considered the marquee caused harm to the setting of the listed building, with no information submitted relating to the pub's viability to outweigh the harm. In this application, no viability assessment has been provided, just a list of general maintenance costs which are not evidenced. This concern is echoed in the Conservation Officer's objection. The application does not provide sufficient detail for the committee to conclude if the marquee is fundamentally required for the pub's viability and maintenance of the Grade 2 listed building. Therefore, the previous reason for refusal should be upheld. The application is full and no conditions are being recommended for temporary status. Therefore, approving this application will mean that marquees can stay in perpetuity of the pub with no future ability to change conditions or alter the marquee in line with changing planning policy or to protect the listed building conservation area. Highway safety and parking was other grounds for refusal. Whilst no objection was raised by Highways under this application, the information submitted is misleading. Every form of consent conditioned the use of the paddock for parking. This has been substantially reduced by Crazy Golf. The parking plan submitted is poor quality with a lack of detail and should never have been accepted when validating the application. It doesn't accurately reflect the area lost to the Crazy Golf. It's not clear on how the number of spaces has been derived, but an unsuitable parking standard has been referred to. The applicant fails to identify the number of spaces required to operate the pub and marquee at capacity post-COVID, and now is heavily reliant on third-party arrangements which are not evidenced in their application and requires use of a farmer's field which isn't available all year round. Unfortunately, the applicant hasn't made any attempt to engage with me to alleviate concerns or understand or address the reasons for the previous objection. The information submitted can only be considered as opinion, and as none of the claims have been sufficiently evidenced, the application doesn't provide any substantial detail to address key issues. In summary, my concerns are unjustified impact of the Grade 2 listed building, insufficient available parking for the size of the venue that has the potential to cause highway safety issues, and granting a full consent removes future ability to make alterations. I fear the lack of information and past experience indicate breaches to conditions are inevitable. On this basis, I ask that the application is refused.
Thank you. Councillor?
I absolutely endorse everything that Mr. Bond has said there. I'm Ian Todd. I've been a resident in the village since 1994, which is about a year before the first marquee was erected in late 1995, without permission. We've objected to every subsequent planning permission application for the marquees shouldn't be there, as they detract from and harm the setting of the Grade 2 listed farmhouse building within the conservation area. And the closer you get to the site, the greater the impact of the marquees relative to their surroundings. There have been several temporary permissions following the lapsing of previous consents, and I don't think any further temporary permissions should be granted, as we're in real danger of seeing a permanent consent by default. I note both of these points are also made by the Conservation Officer and have been made on previous occasions, and that the proposed retention of the marquees is contrary to policy LP 19 of the Peterborough Local Plan and paragraphs 197, 199 and 202 of the National Planning Framework. We have been subject to repeated episodes of excessive noise disturbance over the past 27 years, despite the planning conditions applied by 8 landlords, including the current landlord. And as far back as the 16th of July 2001, Eton Parish Council wrote to the Planning Inspectorate that EPC, Eton Parish Council, has received many complaints, some written, some verbal, of high noise levels from events held in the marquee. And the Planning Inspectorate concluded in its letter dated the 14th of September 2001 that there is no doubt that there is the potential that serious harm to neighbours' living conditions could be caused by the inappropriate and insensitive use of the venue. Well, over the last 27 years, I have continued, and my family has continued, to see excessive harm due to use of that venue, despite the conditions and experience from 8 different landlords. We've been affected by and witnessed problems due to local traffic and inadequate parking provision caused by events at the premises, including on occasions traffic log jammed along Main Road to and from the B1443, cars parked along the road, blocking pavements on the green, blocking our own driveway, and sometimes several cars still being there well into the following day. My car was struck by a taxi exiting the car park during 2001. I'm a keen cyclist. I've nearly been knocked off my bike about 2 or 3 times whilst coming out past the end of the driveway by motorists not looking coming out. The road is quite narrow and partly obscured by a pinch point where there's a large tree, and buses and farm vehicles regularly use the main road.
Mr. Todd, I'm afraid your time is up, unless you've got the last sentence.
Last sentence. Finally, the latest application provides no additional information whatsoever in response to the 2 reasons for refusal on the previous application, stated in the decision dated the 8th of January. And the decision for this latest application can therefore be no different to the refusal of the previous application.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's turn your mic off. Okay, members, do you have any questions at all for Mr. Bond or Mr. Todd? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Excuse me. Gentlemen, I don't know wishes to answer it, but this has gone on since 2001, but I do believe I've read that Eton Parish Council isn't against it, and apart from, your eloquent speeches against this, can you just tell me why there isn't more from, say, Eton Parish Council, or you've fed back to them, please?
Following the refusal, there's been, if you've looked at the planning application, there's been a lot of irrelevant information that's been submitted. Felt as if it was to single myself out for the objection. I decided not to raise it, and it got to a point where stuff had been posted on social media, and I decided to speak to Eton Parish Council. What I have been very conscious of, my issues, I've not wanted to try and divide the community, so I've kept them to myself. It got to a point, like say, something got posted by the applicant on social media, specifically about me. I decided to speak to the Eton Parish Council. Unfortunately, it was a couple of days after a letter of support had gone in. Now, obviously, it's for Eton Parish Council to answer this, but the concern from them is the viability of the pub and it being a key part of the village. Now, obviously, in my notes that I've just spoke to you about, for me, there isn't enough information to warrant to say that it is a viability issue. Everything is just in a design and access statement. It's opinion. There's nothing that's evidenced of receipts. There's no projections or proper projections on the maintenance costs, and therefore the turnover being reliant on that marquee. And for the disturbance that it's caused, and for the reasons for refusal last time, I think my personal opinion is there should have been a lot more robust information submitted.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Can I just piggyback?
You can answer the same question.
To that? Yeah. I think neither of us or nobody was consulted before the Eton Parish Council put that letter in. As soon as I saw it, when I came back from holiday, I've written to the Parish Council and requested that they withdraw their letter of application on the basis that there was no consultation with villagers and it doesn't represent all the villagers, because there are two of us here from a very small hamlet objecting. There are others. There are a lot of old people who don't even use the internet. They won't be able to make a representation and so on. So I think you're seeing the tip of an iceberg here. And as Mark says, I didn't even know that Mark had objected. So, you know, we're not there trying to stir it up. But on the flip side of that is Eton Parish Council has not consulted its parishioners on this.
Okay. Anybody else? Councillor Hogg.
You gave reference to the J&K Soul Lounge that apparently is playing every Friday evening, Saturday and Sunday. This application limits the use of the marquee to 12 function days a year, with no more than 2 function days in a rolling 4-week period. Do you feel that kind of frequency would be more acceptable?
In the previous consent, there was a condition about public use, and it to be invitation only, I think, bar 3. There was no, the conditions were not followed by the applicant. So whilst there is an additional condition put in, my concern is based on previous experience. There have been a number of breaches. I mean, in the 2018 application, they talk about they had a lapse consent, didn't realise they were in breach of planning, yet subsequently there have been a number of breaches, not all of which I've contacted enforcement about because of not wanting to create animosity with the neighbour. However, it has got to a point where I did contact enforcement, and under this or the previous application, this one, I've objected because I just have, it's the nature of breaches when they get investigated, it's happened, and when we've had things investigated before, miraculously it's for instance the noise. Well, I've recorded noise well in excess of the 40 dB, which is in the consent. When environmental health came out, noise limiter was installed and it was at 40 dBA. So it's very, to live with it, it's I welcome anything that's more robust, but I have no, I have no confidence based on previous experience, unfortunately.
Can I come up on that one as well? I mean, the marquees have actually been there since 1995 without permission. First permission was in 2001. I've lived there for 27 years. I've actually seen 27 years of repeated trashing of the conditions, just, whether it be parking, whether it be noise levels. Noise levels is the real biggie, but successive landlords, 6 out of the 8 landlords have been really bad at running the pub. They have really not showed any consideration to their neighbours. 2 of them, however, are able to operate events in the marquees without undue noise and so on. So it can be run properly. I have to say, the current landlord shows no signs of being able to actually comply with the existing conditions, despite his assurance in the additional note that I see he's tabled.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. It's been there, the marquees have been there a long time. Would either of you or both of you, what are your views on this being, given the location of the pub and the village, of this being, what is known in licensed trade parlance, a destination? So therefore, in these straitened times when a lot of pubs are struggling to earn an income, the actual Grade 2 listed building may not be able to do that, and presumably you've had 2 landlords that have operated within the law, within the constraints, if you will. What's your feelings on that, may I ask?
Sorry, can I make the observation that before the marquee was there, and it was 1 marquee to begin with, it's crept to 2, and then it's crept to 2 plus accretions over the years. But before that, it was a nice rural pub restaurant, and the people who ran that managed to make a really nice go of it. It provided a facility to the village in terms of the village had a pub. The marquee was not really necessary to the operation in that mode. Since then, since the first landlord put the marquees up, it's almost like a money spinning opportunity, and the whole attitude is to sort of try to want to run a nightclub in a rural village location. And that, sadly, has been the attitude of most of the landlords.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could answer that. I think, in my points, viability is sort of, the word viability is used, but there is no evidence. It was in the refusal of the last consent, it was clear that they needed to provide some viability, and it's a list of maintenance costs. There's no evidence of what they are. So to say that it's fundamentally required to keep the upkeep of that Grade 2 listed building, I don't see anything in that application that you can say robustly, substantiates that claim. And in terms of destination, obviously the marquee is for private functions, which it hasn't been used for. So I don't think, from a day-to-day running of the pub, it should be an issue. The village is on the Green Wheel route. We get a lot of cyclists go through the village. I mean, it's got a lovely, open space. It's got a play park in there, so it does attract a lot of families. It's not. And that's why I'm really strong in terms of my view of the lack of information that's been put to suggest that it is on viability grounds.
Can I just add there as well that in terms of viability, the bulk of the costs of maintaining that building will be borne by the landlord, Milton Estates, and so lots and lots of maintenance cost information that the landlord is putting forward is effectively money he has chosen to spend himself, because the fundamental maintenance and repair of the listed building will fall to the landlord's, Milton Estates, and not to the landlord.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. You can return to your seats now. Okay. Questions then for officers? Who's got any of those? Anybody? Councillor Rush?
Thank you, Chair. In the report it says the council have a duty of care to protect residents against excessive noise. The PCC Conservation Officer has objected to this, and its failure to protect the character of the conservation area. Could you comment on those two issues, please?
Certainly, Councillor. So, in terms of noise, yes, noise is a material consideration. It's something that is part of the planning process, but it's also can be controlled via other means as well. Environmental legislation, statutory nuisance, for example, can be controlled outside of the planning system. However, as I mentioned in the earlier presentation, we have put tighter conditions relating to noise than was on any of the previous temporary permissions. We're mindful of the fact that there have been breaches in the past, although that's not a reason to refuse planning permission based on conditions being breached previously. That's something that we're dealing with under our enforcement regime. The other question, was it about the harm to the listed building?
Detrimental impact with the character of the conservation area.
Yeah, again, as previously mentioned, there is an identified harm to the setting of the listed building and to the character of the conservation area. That in itself isn't always a reason for refusal. The relevant policy in the Peterborough local plan, together with national policy in the NPPF, is very much about coming to a balanced conclusion. So if any harm that's identified is deemed to be less than substantial, then the test in both the local plan and the NPPF is you weigh it against the public benefits, and it is possible to come to a conclusion that, okay, there is some harm, but it's outweighed by the public benefit. So it's a balance, and that's, members have got to consider, are there sufficient public benefits to outweigh that harm, or aren't there? It's a matter of judgment based on the evidence that's in front of you.
Sorry, Councillor Rush, you want to come back?
You say it's a balance judgment about the harm of the noise of the conservation area, but I sometimes wonder why some establishments are barred from playing music because of the noise, but this one you're going against the conservation officer and allowing it and not taking any issues with the noise.
Yeah, I think there are two separate issues here. I don't think that the conservation officer is saying the harm arises from the noise as such. It's more to do with the visual impact of these marquees and on the setting of the listed building, on the visual character of the conservation area. The noise is a separate issue, and as I said, can be controlled via conditions and noise such as restricting the number of events, which is much tighter than in the previous permissions, and also by equipment to limit the noise. And in the event that there's any breach of those conditions, as with any planning permission, we have our planning enforcement team, and we have enforcement powers to ensure that those conditions are complied with, or any relevant action is taken if breaches continually occur.
Councillor Hogg.
I think you more or less just touched on that, but I just wanted to, clearly there's been objections due to the number of events that have been taking place on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday, that these new conditions would presumably seek to stop that. But I just wanted to get us some reassurance about the robustness of those conditions, and how we were able to, if there was a breach, how quickly and what the implications of that breach what would happen to the landlord if he were to breach those conditions for the more than 12 or more than 2 per on a 4-week rolling basis.
So the robustness of conditions, this is something that we as planning officers always consider when we're attaching conditions to any planning permission. They have to fit a number of statutory tests, and one of those is that they've got to be enforceable. So we have discussed this with our enforcement team, who are actively engaged in investigating previous enforcement breaches, and they're of the view that these, it is possible to enforce. It does fit all the relevant tests of conditions. There's a number of powers open to our enforcement team if in the event of continual breaches. I mean, ultimately it can end up in court with continual breaches and failure to comply with enforcement notices and things like that. So we do have the powers there to enforce, and it's not unusual for conditions to be put on uses, restricting number of events or restricting levels of noise. They're pretty standard, and they're used all over the country, so they are accepted as being enforceable conditions.
So I just wanted to, so if we have a situation where there are numerous breaches of these conditions, is there the possibility of being able to kind of look back and say, well, actually now that the planning permission is now withdrawn because you've not been able to because obviously with the marquees in place and somebody that is continually to breach those conditions, the best way of stopping it would be to remove the marquees. So is there a way of putting into a condition that would mean that if there were so many breaches that it would then nullify the permission if it was so agreed?
No, it doesn't happen like that. Temporary permissions are, I'm not entirely sure why we as a council have granted so many temporary permissions over the years. Normally a temporary permission would be where you've got a proposal and it's not entirely clear to everybody what the impact will be, either visually or what impact noise or parking would have, for example. I'm not talking about breaches of conditions, I'm talking about the impact within what's been permitted. And for whatever reason, this council has granted a number of temporary permissions, and now permanent permission is being applied for. So we've got to look at what is being applied for. Can any impacts be mitigated by condition? And we feel that they can be, which is why we've added those conditions. We've also tightened the conditions because it is felt that the previous conditions weren't tight enough, essentially. Though clearly the impact of what was allowed under the previous permissions is causing an issue, an unacceptable issue, which is why the conditions are tighter this time. Hopefully that goes some way to answering the question.
Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is probably a question that's carrying on from Councillor Hoggs, because what I was thinking of was similar about because it's a permanent application, and in the past we've discussed that you can only discuss or vote on what's in front of you, which is the permanent application. So it was similar to the question I was going to ask, which was would that application, would you be able to put a condition in to say you can have, maybe this is for legal officers more than yourself, that it's a temporary permission until, to make sure that those conditions are being met, which can then turn into a permanent one? Because obviously if you're saying it's going to be a permanent one and there's no reversal of it, what is the, how do you go back from that if you needed to?
Well, the government guidance is quite clear about temporary permissions. You shouldn't keep granting one after the other. They should be only there to kind of test the ground, if you like, when it's not clear what the impacts will be. In this case, temporary permissions have been going on for 20 years plus, so we know what the visual impact is. We know what the impact from noise is, so it wouldn't be justified to have a further temporary permission. Okay. The conditions we feel are strong and robust and enforceable. I'm not aware of what, if any, enforcement action we've taken previously, but we do have the powers to take any necessary enforcement action from now if permission were to be granted. So I suppose the simple answer is we can't do it. It would be contrary to government guidance to go for further temporary permission. It should either be an approval of a permanent permission or a refusal.
Okay, I've got a couple for you. Patches for highways first. Go for you first. I'll give you a bit of a break because you've hogged it. Alex, this parking arrangement, and they talk about a paddock as well as an overflow. Realistically, that paddock's not going to be at all useful in the winter, is it? It's going to be a mud pit, isn't it, one would think? Would that be a fair thing to say? Has that been taken into account? Because you're saying you haven't got an issue with parking. Is your comment based on the fact it doesn't matter if that's open or not? You still think there's enough? Let's put it like that.
To address your question, Councillor Harper and Chairman, it's a bit hard to say what ground conditions will be like during the winter. Obviously, in the sort of wetter periods of the winter months, then it won't be attractive for people to drive into that paddock area. But we have the benefit of knowing that there's 20 years of activity that's been taking place on that site, and we know that that has been operating without any issues to highway safety. So,
comfortable.
So with that in mind, then I've got no concerns that even if in the event that the paddock couldn't be utilised for parking, that there is curbside parking available along Main Road, and that could be utilised for parking. But we calculated there's 113 parking spaces, including the paddock area, which far exceeds the parking space provision expected for a public house of this floor area. So, okay,
thank you. And to bring you to this viability, now I'm going back to Phil now. The viability. Are you satisfied with the evidence produced? That, the viability evidence, because there seems to be a question mark over. I read it myself. We've spent so many £1,000s on the house, but it doesn't really show the viability of the business. It shows how much they spent on the house. So, are you really happy with that's proved the viability of the business?
Yes, Councillor. I think on balance, we are satisfied that sufficient information has been supplied to us this time, although it's correct to say it's not a full in-depth viability assessment. I think what we've done this time is we've looked at everything in the round that's in front of us, and we've looked at things like, can we put any further conditions on that might mitigate some of the impacts further than previous permissions, and we've come to a sort of balanced conclusion that there's enough information there. And also one thing that's gone into the mix, I think that is important, is that these marquees have been there for 20 odd years, so they are an established part of the business that's been operating there for 20 years. So that is a factor that has to be taken into account. Without it being necessary to sort of drill down into the very detailed specifics of viability, and I understand as well that the owners of the building, Milton Estate, the lease doesn't cover, well, Milton Estates are not responsible for the ongoing maintenance of that building. Whoever leases it has that responsibility as part of the agreement. That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else got any questions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, so it is a repair that's based on the licensee, or whoever takes that. Milton Estates have no responsibility for the upkeep. That's down to whoever rents the property for them, yeah?
That's my understanding, yes.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, good. Thank you very much. Sorry you went through a bit of a grilling there. Right, we'll go to debate then, please. Who wants to start debate on this? Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Chair. So, I mean, as always the case with these things that come to us, there's no kind of straight answers or easy wins, or certainly other than maybe the ones that have to come to us because of the fact that it's from a councillor or a senior officer or something like that, and the transparency side of things kicks in, and we have to be seen to be going through to make sure that but anyway, I digress. So in terms of this, I think that just sort of ticking off some of these boxes here, that I think that the marquees are well shielded with trees and undergrowth, etc., etc. A lot of these pictures, you'd be hard pushed to try and point out where the marquee was. From some of the pictures that we saw. I mean, the fact that you knew where the marquee was and therefore could see that there was a bit of white, and therefore that was basically where the marquee is. But set against a clear sky, or even worse, a sky with thick cloud, it could be quite difficult to point it out. And I think it's perfectly reasonable to see a marquee, up and down the country, pubs, restaurants, hotels, etc. have got marquees in their curtilage for exactly this purpose, for the purpose of putting on events, specifically sort of weddings, I would suggest, and Christmas parties, which is essentially what I believe this is the main purpose for this to be. I think that the condition of only 12 events a year, with only 2 in a 4-week period, then gives, if there is any sound leakage, that does give some sort of respite to the neighbours. It's not like they're having it for 3 days in 1 week, or and every week from April to September. There is a certain amount of respite to be had there. I think we're all aware that the licensing trade has changed quite considerably in the last 20 years in terms of viability, in terms of how the price of alcohol and how these businesses run themselves. Time and time again, we're seeing what I would call community assets. Specifically with this village, it seems that the parish council are fully on board with this application. I am disappointed that the applicant wasn't able to attend and have questions put to them. That has kind of a bit of a kind of a minus mark there for me, because there are maybe a couple of questions that I would like to put to them vis-a-vis their commitment to standing by these conditions. But in the round, I have to say I'm kind of in favour of this application. I think it's a great venue, a good asset to the community, and I would hate to see it close on the basis that it was no longer financially viable. So thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. My thoughts are, when you arrive on the site, the marquees are a bit, to coin a phrase, in your face. But I've had to re-engineer my thinking, because when you look at some of the pictures, so if you look at that one, obviously you're seeing the marquees, but there are other pictures there when I haven't bothered to look, and it's only when they've been shown to me that you can barely see them. I think it's fair to say Councillor Hussain and I represent an urban ward that only has one restaurant in it, just as this area does, and we have issues with fireworks that comfortably exceed 40 decibels, albeit for a shorter period of time, and trying to enforce that is obviously the devil's own job. So for me, and as Councillor Hogg has said, the licensing trade has changed beyond all recognition in that 20 years. And if this is the kind of thing that's needed to make a place viable, then I'm loath to vote against it. Having said that, then I would like to see greater enforcement, because there's only 2 landlords in the past 20 years that don't seem to have flouted the rules. I don't know how they managed to do it, whether they were food destinations and therefore they didn't need to have loud music exceeding 40 decibels, but that's not something that's going to bother Milton Estates, as long as somebody obviously takes over the care and repair, the maintenance of a Grade 2 listed building, which isn't cheap, and I'm assuming that part of the viability has been based on we have to do this before we can do that. So hearts and heads, it's a long time since I've darkened its doors, but I'm in agreement with Councillor Hogg is that we are the planning committee. I think the can has been kicked down the road far enough, and it looks like it's down to us. You know, it stops with us. And on that basis, it's been there for 25 years. I'm minded to go with officer recommendations, but I would like to see wholeheartedly, as we work with the police and officers on the restaurant, the destination in our ward, I'd like to see enforcement rigorously enforced, particularly as they are going with, they're saying that they will accept the conditions that are put upon them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Rush.
Thank you, Chair. Peterborough City Council employs a PCC conservation officer, and he has objected to this application. Failure to comply with MPPC paragraph 194, detrimental impact on the second listed buildings. And also it says in the report, officers agree that the marquees do result in harm to do harm the conservation area, and but they still disagree with the conservation officer. Also in the report it says the council have the duty of care to protect residents against excess noise. As the 2 gentlemen have said, they've had 20 odd years of excessive noise, little or no enforcement to be taken. So I do find that I would probably be voting against this application.
Thank you, Councillor Rush. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair. So I drive not directly past this pub, but on the main road past this on a regular basis. I'd say probably at least once or twice a day across the dreaded crossing, and I've never really noticed the marquees, whether it's winter or in the summer. So I would say that the impact on the listed building from a distance, I would say definitely I don't think that's a reason for refusal. On the approach, as Councillor Jones said, yes, it is a little bit in your face, but again, you only see it once you're at the entrance. And you're obviously going there for the reason of using the pub or the marquee. In recent times, we have seen a lot of pubs in villages and within the city closing. And with the number of landlords that have changed over the last 20 years, I would say that maybe it has struggled. That's why it's needed 7 or 8 different landlords over that time. So maybe there is a need for those marquees to make it viable for that business. I do feel for the residents if they're saying, you know, with the noise issues. So I would hope that well, I've got trust in our officers in that they would enforce the conditions that are being put on there, and with that in mind, I'll be voting in favour of the applicant.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up on Councillor Rush's point. If I was a conservation officer and I was doing my job properly, I'd probably object. If I was the enforcement officer and I was doing my job properly, then I'd be on top of this going forward, as they should have been in the past. We can't change the past, can't cry over spilt milk, but going forward, I hope that with officer recommendations, with the conditions that are put in, then everything that we've said will make it tolerable, if not improve it to the satisfaction of the people who are objecting.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No others? Right, I'll say my piece then. I have to say that only 2 people turned up and talked to us today, and they were the 2 people that didn't like the idea of it. So I'm a little bit shocked that the Parish Council didn't turn up, or didn't send a representative, and the landlord or a person using the pub or running the pub didn't turn up to speak to us, well, or, you know, so we could have had a bit of a chat about different things. That always goes down not too well with me, but visually, I agree. At the end of the day, unless you're in the driveway, you don't really see it, and I wouldn't agree with the conservation officer in this one. You know, he's doing his job, as Councillor Jones says, but I agree with the officers that it's less than substantial. Indeed, it's very, very less than substantial, in my view. The big issue, I guess, for me is the viability. Parking was one, but I've got the answer I wanted on that we're very happy with that. There's substantial parking. Viability, I'm not. You've said it yourself. Councillor Jones mentioned it. I think Councillor Hussain mentioned it. Maybe even, I think Councillor Hogg mentioned it about viability, about needing these sort of things. Otherwise, they won't survive. Yeah? Where's the proof of that then? Because I haven't seen it. I've spent 20 odd grand on the house. Where's the detailed proof for me that says this is my income, these are my outgoings? You might have spent 20 grand, but if you've made 100 grand, you've done 80k. That one number doesn't mean anything to me. I understand what you're saying. Viability is extremely important, and that's one of the biggest things that's been put forward. I don't see the evidence to say this is a viable. This wouldn't survive without the marquees. Now you tell me where you've seen it. There's a question for you. Have you seen it? No, neither have I. That's my issue. The rest of it I can go with. I totally understand if viability is the issue. If the proof had been there, I'd have backed it. And I understand through COVID and all the rest of it, these sort of establishments have gone hell for leather to try and help the community because of the distancing and whatever, serving food, music outside or whatever. And I'm sure that licensing could protect this. You know, I agree with that, you know, 12 a year and all the rest of it, that's fine, that would be fine. I'd have no issue with any of that. But it still boils down to me that you haven't proved that you need it. And that's one of the big ones in this. One of the big things is, will it not survive without it? In other words, is that marquee kills the business if it goes. I haven't seen that. I've not had a chance to ask the landlord. I've not had a chance to ask the Parish Council or anybody other supporter. Nobody's told me it. So I'm afraid because that big key question is missing, then I'm going to go against officers and I'm going to refuse it. Anybody else? Okay, then we're going to go for a proposal. Oh, you got a proposal for me? Oh yeah, come back. Yeah, sorry.
So I was just going to come back on on what you've just brought up. So yes, I think, you know, we never get 100% of what we're looking for in terms of information, and we have to use our knowledge and experience to maybe fill in some of the gaps. I would suggest, and you know, clearly the wedding trade is a lucrative one in terms of, you know, you've got a lot of people turning up, and there's a lot of money spent. You know, you only have to have known somebody that was married in the last 5 to 10 years and asked them how much they spent on a venue for their wedding breakfast, to understand that there is substantial amounts of money involved. The fact that these have been there for 20 years, they are quite, I would suggest, are integral into the business of this. It's not that they've just been there for 12 months and they've given it a bit of a go. It's been there for 20 years, and it's subsequently that the turnover of landlords, 8 landlords over that period of time, would suggest that it's not easy, unless they've subsequently been so successful that they've bought a private island in the Maldives or something and retired for the rest of the time. But I would suggest that that's probably not the case, and that actually it is, because it is quite a tough business. It has been a tough business for a very long time, as we've already evidenced the fact that a number of businesses across Peterborough, pubs have been closing all over the place, and they've been turned into houses of multiple occupancy. They've been knocked down and turned into housing estates of small housing estates of 3 to 4, 5, 6 properties, and time and time again you see this happening, and you see that essentially the local community loses that community asset. I know that there was, in the paperwork, it said something about that this was deemed to be a community asset, and they said it's not a community asset, this is a business. But actually it is very much a community asset in terms of somewhere for people in the village to go, to have a drink, to socialise, etc., etc. So whilst I agree, and I did mention the fact that I wasn't overly happy with the fact that the applicant wasn't here, or certainly representative, I think the fact that the Parish Council hasn't turned up is probably in keeping with what we normally have, unless they're here to object. If they're here to approve, they're normally, that's their, they've put the tick, and that's the end of the involvement for them. It's very rare that they would come to add to an applicant rather than just to take away. So I have to say I disagree with you slightly there. So yes, maybe not all the T's have been crossed and not all the I's have been dotted, but I'm using my own kind of knowledge, as it were, to kind of fill in those gaps. And I would very definitely say that from my experience of the nighttime economy and that trade, that the use of those marquees would be integral to the success of the business. And that is why I'm continuing to listen to, as always, when I first say what I've got to say, I still listen to what other people have to say, and listen to Brian's objection. And I have to say I'm still firmly on the fence of agreeing with council officers. That's always going to be my default position, I have to say. It's only when I get persuaded against going with council officers that there has to be a pretty hard push for me to go against council officers. So unless somebody else wants to talk, I've got a proposal.
Anybody else want to talk apart from me? Not being critical, but I don't know where you're basing it from. You're basing it on maybes, And the other parish council I meant to say, actually, I forgot to say, actually, was the fact that we were told that some of the residents hadn't even been consulted. So their recommendation is pretty flawed as well, isn't it, really, in my view? Had that, like I say, the numbers been there, I'd probably be with you. But at the moment, he might well be making a mint out of it before the marquee. We don't know, do we? Or she. So I don't know. So I'm not going to change my mind either, because I've not been proved. If I was proved, fine. And I think it's dangerous for us to... I know we have to weigh up the odds, but I think that's too woolly. That I've spent 20 grand or so on the house, so without that I wouldn't have spent the 20 grand. I don't know. Can't be proved. So we're going for your proposal? Yes?
So my proposal is to go with officer's recommendation and approve.
Okay, thank you. Seconder? Councillor Jones? Yep, all happy with that? Right, all those in favour of the proposal? And against? 3, and that would be no abstentions. Or is there an abstention? No.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that is proposed to go with the officer recommendation, and that was agreed 6 for, 3 against.
Okay, so the application is approved. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on. We are on to 5.2, which is the Castor Business Centre, Vogel Training Centre in Helpston Road, Aylesworth, sorry. Just let you set yourself up. All ready, Amanda?
Yep, thank you, Chair.
Okay, so as I said, this is the Castor Business Centre, Vogel Training Centre in Helpston Road, Aylesworth, and it's going to be presented today by Ms McSherry, when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. Planning permission has been sought to demolish the existing building on site and replace it with 4 detached 4-bedroom dwelling houses with double garages. The application site is outlined red on the plan. The yellow line marks the extent of the village boundary and the conservation area in the village. So on the opposite side of the road, on the left-hand side of the line, is within the village, and you can see the application site is on the right-hand side. So it's outside but adjacent to and abutting the conservation area and the village boundary. You'll see to the south of the site, the village boundary is about 50 metres south of the application site. So the application site is surrounded on 3 sides, as you can see, by agricultural fields, and the Helpston Road bounds the site on the other side, on the western side of the site. You can see from the plan the predominant character of residential properties along Helpston Road is of houses on an east-west alignment facing onto the Helpston Road. The application site, by contrast to the surrounding plots, is a long, thin plot, and it has a greater depth than the development to the south, the residential plots. The existing building on site is not of any great architectural merit or significance to the village or the conservation area, and so its loss is considered to be acceptable. We'll show you some photos now of the building. So this is the front elevation of the building. This faces west onto the Helpston Road. This is the northern side of the building. You can see the building and the landscape boundary on the north. And this is the rear of the building. This is facing westwards, and you can see the area of sort of open space and the landscaping boundary on the south beyond. So this shows the existing layout on the site. You'll see the existing building is positioned fairly centrally on the site, with parking between the building and the road on the left-hand side. You can see the existing vehicle access to Helpston Road on the top left-hand corner of the plan. It is proposed to retain and reuse this as access to serve the dwellings. You can see the site has extensive landscape boundaries which are proposed to be retained. To give you an idea of the character of the site and surrounds, I'll show you some photos. So this photo is taken looking southwards along Helpston Road. You can see the vehicle access to the site on the left-hand side of the photo. Beyond this, you can see part of the landscape boundary that bounds the site and Helpston Road, and you can see some of the properties on the opposite side of the road and their front boundary walls. This is the vehicle access. This is taken from within the site, looking towards the Helpston Road to the west. You can see the residential house on the opposite side of the street, and you can also see the landscape boundaries on either side of the access. So this is taken looking towards the western boundary of the site with Helpston Road. You can see the landscape boundaries. This is another photo showing the access, and it shows part of the northern landscape boundary of the site. This is taken further along that northern boundary, looking to the corner, the rear corner of the site. And finally, this is a photo. It's looking towards the rear of the site, so that's the eastern boundary, and you can see the landscape boundaries both to that rear and to the side of the site. So this is the proposed block plan, and whilst you can appreciate that the residential dwellings are located outside the village boundary, they do abut the site, and in line with the neighbourhood plan policy AH2 supports residential development that abuts the site, so the principle of redeveloping the site for residential use is accepted and in accordance with that policy. The existing training facility on the site is proposed to be relocated, so the proposal will not result in the loss of this training facility. You can see from the layout plan, these are the 4 proposed houses and their garages that are under consideration today. They are on a north-south orientation on the site, which is to the left. The left of the site is the Helpston Road, so you can see that they face northwards rather than westwards towards the road. This is at odds with the prevailing character of the residential development along this site, which have a sort of east-west access and are all positioned to face onto the road. The properties have large footprints. They are proposed in close proximity to each other, and they're quite close to their landscape side boundaries. And in general, we feel as officers that they have got a suburban residential layout character. We feel that this would not respect the rural character of this site and the surrounding conservation area. The conservation officer objects to the proposal on the grounds that the proposal does not appear as a natural extension to the village. The development does not follow this linear pattern of development on Helpston Road with properties facing onto the road, or it doesn't appear like a sort of farmstead edge of village character as the other 3 recently developed houses on the opposite side of Helpston Road do. Therefore, the first officer recommendation is one of refusal on character grounds, that the proposed development would be contrary to policies LP 16, LP 19 and the Neighbourhood Plan Policy AH2, because the design, layout, appearance and scale would unacceptably impact on the character and appearance of the site, surrounding area and conservation area. No neighbour objections have been received. The Parish Council support the principle of residential development on the site, but would like to see the tree officer comments taken into consideration if possible, and tree preservation orders applied where appropriate. The tree officer maintains their objection to this proposal. They have assessed the additional information supplied by the agent. The proposed dwellings are positioned quite close to proximity to the landscape boundaries. Due to this proximity, there would likely lead to unacceptable shading and unacceptable tree pruning and felling by future residents due to the shade and anxiety because of this proximity. To protect the longevity of the landscape boundaries, which are important on this edge of village setting, the tree officer recommends the number and sizes of dwellings be reduced and the properties move further away from these tree boundaries to avoid any potential tree losses or loss of amenity for residents from overshadowing. Therefore, the officers recommend refusal on 2 further grounds: that the proposal is in the position of the houses are in too close proximity to trees and would affect their longevity and future retention, and secondly, that they would result in unacceptable overshadowing, in particular for plots 1 and 4. This is contrary to policies LP 17 and LP 28 of the local plan. So just show you the actual dwellings that are proposed. So this is plot 1. This will be positioned closest to the Helpston Road. You'll see the elevation plans and the floor plans here. Similarly, this is plot 2, plot 3, and this is plot 4, so this is the dwelling position closest to the end of the site, the eastern boundary. And these are the floor plans. And we'll just run you through the garage plans. They're not very exciting, apologies. This is your typical garage on plot 1. Plot 2 and 3, we have the garage accommodation. You can see that there's first floor accommodation proposed as well, studios with en-suites for the proposed residents. So helpfully, these are 3D models. So this is looking eastwards, and you can see plot 1, which would be closest to the main road, on the right-hand side of the photo. And this is a model looking southwards and sort of east towards the main road. So the property you can see on the bottom left-hand corner is plot 4. You can see, if you see between plots 2 and 3, there's the garages at the back, and you can just see the dormer windows denoting the first floor accommodation. So just to sort of round off, I mentioned the 3 farmstead agricultural dwellings on the opposite side of Helpston Road. So these are the properties that you can see here. This is looking northwards out of the village. Similarly, this is looking sort of southwards back into the villages. You can see the agricultural farmsteads on the right-hand side. And finally, this is looking southwards into the village. So what you can see is the north elevation of the site. You can see the existing building on the site behind the trees. Plot 1 would sit to the right-hand side of that existing building. Plot 2 would be where the building is, and the houses of plot 3 and 4 would be positioned on the left-hand side. So, as mentioned earlier in the presentation, the officer recommendation is one of refusal on 3 grounds. 1, the layout and design is uncharacteristic of the rural edge location and conservation area. 2, the pressure to remove the trees on the site boundary due to proximity. And 3, unacceptable overshadowing of the garden spaces for the proposed residents, particularly plots 1 and 4. Just draw your attention to the update report. This clarifies that the tree officer is still in objection to the proposal based on the additional information received. The second point is in respect of some additional highway information. Unfortunately, there wasn't time to consider this highway information. So if members were minded to approve the application, the construction management plan would be dealt with by way of condition rather than agreeing this up front. And finally, just to say that the applicant has expressed their willingness to submit further tree information should members consider this to be necessary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr McSherry. Okay, we'll call first Mr Shaw, David Shaw, and I've also got, just David Shaw first, can I? Yeah, 10 minutes. Yeah. Who's the lady? Okay, Mr Shaw, welcome to this afternoon's proceedings. You'll have 10 minutes when you're ready as Parish Councillor to address committee.
Good afternoon, Chair and Councillors. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. I am David Shaw. Joan Pickett, sat next to me, is the chairman of Aylesworth Parish Council and is here really to answer any questions you may have after I've tried to explain things. For clarity, I am not an Aylesworth Parish Councillor, but I am a member of the Aylesworth and Castor Joint Neighbourhood Plan Working Group, which was set up by Aylesworth and Parish Councils and Castor Parish Councils to prepare and monitor the neighbourhood plan for the 2 villages. I have specifically been asked by APC to speak for them today, and I'm accompanied by Joan Pickett, the chair. I should also declare that I am, of course, also a chartered town planner. There are 4 points I would like to emphasise to you this afternoon. Firstly, that when we made the Aylesworth neighbourhood plan, this was a site that was exactly the sort of site which we hoped would be developed for housing. Although we did not allocate specific sites in order to keep flexibility within our plan, this site was understood and displayed at public meetings to be very suitable for development for housing. That neighbourhood plan was supported by over 97% of those voting. That was 301 people out of 308 people. Secondly, the neighbourhood plan requires 20 new homes to be built in Aylesworth during the plan period. So far, we have only had 1, so we do need some more houses. This site will very specifically help meet that target. The third point is about design, which is one of the reasons suggested for refusal. I would like to start this point by explaining that I do have enormous respect for your Conservation Officer, and his views are usually extremely helpful in ensuring that development in the village is of a good standard. However, in matters of design, which can be such a subjective matter, there are always going to be cases where we disagree, and I'm afraid in this case we do disagree. There has not been a single objection within the village about this design. This is unusual in the village, where there is usually plenty of concern about whether buildings are in keeping with the village design statement. The site is an industrial unit. The site is not an old farmyard, so we're not very interested in trying to make it look like a farmyard. It's something it's never been. The design requirement we do like in the village is stone materials to elevations. That is what is proposed by the applicant. Stone is a very local material for us, and it makes new homes built in the village look as if they belong in the village. We would, as a preference, like Bradstone conservation roof tiles, which the applicant hasn't currently proposed. But the same house builder has used these on houses he built a few years ago opposite. We would like those tiles on this or something very similar. This is a matter which we would like to be seriously considered under a condition applied to any permission if it can't be agreed beforehand. The fourth point is about trees. The site is surrounded by a number of trees, as you have seen, some of which are reasonable and some of which are well past their prime, as explained in the tree survey. To us, the key areas where it is important that some of the existing trees are kept is on the north side, which is very visible as you enter the village, and secondly, beside Helpston Road, which impacts upon the street scene. We think that the current layout means that at least some of these trees will survive because the houses are not up against the northern boundary. And we think it would be sensible to place a TPO on a few of the better trees in these areas. We think it is sensible and good to try and protect a few rather than necessarily all of them. On the east and south sides, we consider that your tree officer is correct in thinking that there will be much pressure to fell many of the trees by future occupiers. However, we consider that new planting of good-sized trees is more likely to be successful than trying to retain all the existing trees. We would expect occupiers to be regularly trying to reduce the size of the old trees, while newly planted trees are more likely to be acceptable to occupiers. I will try and explain that in a bit more detail. The existing trees are all field maples and sycamores, self-grown. To the average occupier, these trees will probably have little interest beyond being a tree with leaves. They do, of course, have a wildlife benefit and absorb CO2. But compared to some other native species, which could be planted in their place, such as blackthorn, bird cherry, crabapple and hawthorn, they have limited visual appearance. A garden-sized tree with blossom on in the spring and red berries in the autumn stands a much better chance of being kept by the landowners than a sycamore which just sends sticky muck onto their garden furniture. So we think there is a positive way to try and deal with the trees around the site. What we are suggesting is that a good landscaping scheme is going to be a solution. We think that reducing the number of properties on the site so that gardens are larger will not necessarily save more existing trees. It will also, of course, mean that more houses have to go elsewhere in the village to reach our target. So, to summarise, we think that it is beneficial to reuse this site for housing. We think that 4 homes help assist with our housing targets and makes efficient use of the land. We consider that the design is acceptable, providing suitable materials, natural stone is a must, are used. We consider that some trees should be TPO'd and in other cases more suitable tree types planted. We respectfully request that the committee either approve the application subject to suitable conditions on materials and trees and other matters, or there is an alternative which may be quicker, given that it's good to get things done once you've given planning permission, which is to delegate authority to officers to agree these outstanding matters and then grant permission with fewer pre-commencement conditions. And the Parish Council would be delighted to help assist the officers with sorting out exactly how these trees may work if it is helpful. I and the Chair and Parish Council will be delighted to clarify any point, and thank you for listening to us.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Any questions, please? Anybody on the committee? Councillor Hither.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Afternoon, Mr. Shaw. You'll excuse me if I say that I know you've been around the development block a few times, and it's always good to see you and hear your erudite address. You particularly thought that a farmstead appearance wouldn't be appropriate. Could you just perhaps expand on that for the benefit of members?
Well, yes. Firstly, I think there are often sites in villages which are old farmsteads, and I think it is quite appropriate in those circumstances where you are developing an old farmstead to make the new design echo that tradition. This was never a farmstead. This was I think this was originally a British Telecom shed, which has since been used as a training centre. So it has no farming background on this site. So making buildings look like a farmyard is just a pastiche. It's not relevant to what the village was ever like. So I think we have to be true. This would be 4 new buildings built in local materials, which I think could look very good. I don't see that pretending it's an old barn adds anything to the village. We've old barns in the village have been converted very successfully, but this is not the sort of place where you do it. I hope that helps.
Yes, indeed, it does. Can I also assume that, I mean, you and I will both know Hereward Homes very well, Mr. Gibbison's firm, who do, I have to say to members, do build an extremely good development, small developments normally, and indeed, as was alluded to by the officers, have built the properties opposite. Does it encourage you that a firm like Hereward Homes would be interested and indeed build this, and would you have confidence in the quality of the build that we come to expect from a firm like that?
I completely agree with that, and we do. Indeed, before this application came in, the Parish Council was written to by the proposed developer to see if there'd be any way the parish would support the site being bigger for development. In other words, going outside the existing brownfield site. And the Parish Council responded and said, no, we think you should keep within the current boundaries. So we have every trust that this developer is someone who actually does care about what they are doing and goes about things the right way with a good product.
Thank you. If I might, Chair, I do have an example in my own village behind Wisteria Farm that Hereward Homes built some years ago, and it is particularly successful, I have to say. So I do concur with your thoughts about them as a firm, not necessarily with the application. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else got any questions? No. Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll now call Simon Machin and Ben Atkins, please. Good afternoon, gentlemen. You'll have 5 minutes to address committee when you're ready.
Hello, committee. Ben Atkins had wanted to talk today, but was unfortunately called away and can't attend. So is it okay for myself to speak in his place? John Gibbison, Hereward Holmes.
Well, I have to ask committee that, so if you just bear with me. Committee, got any problems, or are you happy? No? Go ahead then, please.
I'll be brief. I'd just like to say that I'd like to thank the parish for their comments, and from Hereward Holmes' point, we would be more than happy to support a change of roof tile, and also working with the parish and planners regarding trees, and support any TPOing of those trees that are worthy of retention. As for Ben, he apologises and would just like us to reiterate that the following, as his statement of the 18th of March, that the existing building has always been in pretty poor condition, would need considerable investment to get it back to satisfactory condition for any type of use. Vogel Training urgently needs to expand and upgrade the training centre in order for it to survive. The present site has issues with trying to extend it to meet its future demand. A lot of the time the on-site parking is full to capacity. Expanding the site further would likely cause more traffic issues with the village and potential parking on Helpston Road. After exploring all options, he concluded that the only way he could achieve was what he wanted was to sell the premises to help cover the costs of relocation, expansion and improvement. He feels that by doing so, this will enable him to immediately create at least 50 to 75% additional staffing level, as well as increasing his ability to cope with additional apprenticeship training by more than 150%. Selling the premises as a commercial or industrial unit simply would not raise sufficient funds to enable relocation, improvement and the expansion options urgently required. They wish to move the training facility to Fletcher Road, Kingston Park, and hopes that the planners committee can look at it favourably. That's it.
Thank you, Chairman. I think Mr Shaw, on behalf of the Parish Council, very eloquently addressed the key planning issues. I don't think we need to repeat that, but more than happy to answer any questions that members have. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, any questions, please? Councillor Hiller.
Thank you, Chair. Probably a question for Mr Machen, as a planning expert of some reputation. If indeed this wasn't redeveloped, this site as a housing development, and was onward sold for more commercial use, could you just give the members an outline of what that commercial use could in fact be?
Thank you, Councillor Hiller, for those words. The use of the building actually falls within an education use class rather than a general industrial use class. So I think that what you would inevitably face is a planning application for a different type of commercial use, and inevitably one that is more intensive in its nature than what you currently have with the training facility. So perhaps one of the reasons why there have been no local resident objections to this planning application is because people see that there could be an alternative which would have a very different impact upon their residential amenity than 4 houses. Always very difficult to second guess why people don't object to something, but I think, as Mr Shaw alluded to, it's highly unusual in a village like Aylesworth to have a planning application for new residential development that receives no objections from the local community, and where the parish council attend the planning committee to speak in favour of an application and make what are very constructive recommendations about the detail of that proposal. So I think there inevitably, if it weren't in residential use in terms of redevelopment, there would be pressure for some other kind of commercial use on the site.
Thank you. for that explanation. That's much appreciated. Just repeating my question to Mr. Shaw, do you, in your experience, have confidence with the type of property and the quality of build of a company like Mr. Gibbison's in that particular location specifically?
Yeah, from what I've seen over the 14 years I've been in this area, Hereward Homes have a very strong reputation for building a bespoke, high-quality product with traditional design detailing and in traditional materials primarily. And the approach on individual sites is for that specific context. So you don't generally get two Hereward Homes on different sites that are the same. They all respond to the local vernacular. Just these things happen. And just a sort of parallel example, and the question that you put to Mr. Shaw about would an agricultural style development be appropriate for this site? Our position is that no, it wouldn't be, because it was built as a telephone exchange, and it is slightly unusual in that regard, whereas over in Moorcote in Rutland, redevelopment of a farmyard adjacent to the conservation area, Hereward Homes are building a new scheme which replaces those agricultural buildings, but which is agricultural in feel. So I think you've got to design a product for an individual site and context, which is what we've tried to do here. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a question for Mr. Gibbison. Your immediate reaction to some of the commentary from Mr. Shaw was that you and your firm would be very amenable to talk about roof finishing materials and tree TPOs, etc., etc. Is that a genuine statement, Mr. Gibbison?
Yes, it is. We do try to work with local people and local parishes with the developments we put forward. So certainly we've been involved with this from very early on with the parish, this scheme, so and keeping them informed of what we plan to do. So that would carry on through this next process if it was deemed acceptable.
Anybody else? Right, why four? Why 4 houses? Why couldn't it be 3 or 2? Is it just a commercial decision? Because obviously the trees are an issue to officers, and if it wasn't 4 properties on there, larger properties, you would get over that issue fairly well, I'd have thought, with bigger gardens further away from the properties, as was mentioned. So is it 4 purely because it's not financially viable if you don't do 4?
Yeah, we've basically worked the scheme out to financial viability for what the owner wants to get to enough money to build a new setup, a new training centre. So basically we've worked for what he needs and the cost to demolish it and remediate and build it out. So it works for that layout, and that's what we early doors spoke to the parish about. From very early on, we looked at the viability. We said, look, we're going to need 4 houses, and showed them sketch schemes from very early on of what would be needed. So yeah, it's basically viability.
If I can just add to that, Chairman, from a kind of planning policy perspective, it's also about land use efficiency in terms of the MPPF, as in the site we believe is capable of accommodating 4 dwellings satisfactorily with appropriate curtilages to those dwellings. Your tree officer has a view, our tree consultant has a different view in terms of the impact on trees, and it was heartening to hear the parish council's thoughts on trees, as in it's better to retain the best specimens, perhaps to replace the rest with new trees, because when you look at them closely, I'm not sure how many members visited the site, but it is pretty much self-set boundary to the site. It's not been actively managed, and they're not particularly good quality trees. The ones along the road frontage have the greatest impact, and the greatest impact in terms of conservation area setting. So we think it's appropriate to accommodate 4 dwellings on the site, that can be done without harming trees. And the other point that this links to although you might argue it's not directly a planning matter because there isn't a legal agreement linking the two, is that the value that is achieved from the sale of this site by the Vogel Group is directly reinvested in their business, which is about skills and apprenticeships. So almost the more they get, the more investment they can make in that existing business to support the local economy.
Okay, thank you very much. Anybody else? Gentlemen, thank you. Okay, questions then? Any questions to Ms McSherry or Highways or Councillor Hussain?
Thank you, Chair. When we, on the site visit, we were shown the houses across the road, and you mentioned about the farmstead look. It's been brought up again by the parish and Mr Meacham. The thing with the development across the road was that it was along the road, so it was quite wide, and you could see how it sort of fall into that sort of character or look. On this development, if we go to the image of when you're looking into the site, if we can do that, if that's possible. It was just basically, I was just going to say that looking down from the gate at the development, at that image, to me that does look a little bit, staggered. Maybe not a farmstead, but it looked, attractive to me. Not in a farmstead style, but it definitely didn't look like a cityscape almost. So, how are officers able to say how they would make it look more like a farmstead, or is that just an opinion?
Amanda?
I think our concern and the concern of the conservation officer was that there are 4 sort of large detached houses with garages adjacent, and that sort of pattern of development is kind of what you would find in sort of suburban housing estate. You have the road in, then you have the houses and the garages. I think we just felt that because it was an edge of village setting, perhaps something that had more of a character for that rural or agricultural setting, and I think it will be for sort of members to decide, whether they agree with officers or whether they agree more with the applicant and the agent. You're right, we showed the properties on the opposite side of the road, and in that instance the applicant did decide to try and do more of a farmyard setting, and I think it was more about having sort of the outbuildings that you were attached to the main properties. Some of the garages appeared in a sort of a wooden material to give that sort of barn appearance, so it was more about how they would look, but those are much more visible, as you say, from the road. You wouldn't be able to do the same on this site because it's long, thin, but you would sort of, like you say, take that principle of having sort of your principal main dwellings and then your character of sort of smaller, what appears like sort of barn outbuildings, and you would just, like say, rotate it 90 degrees and have it more along that linear form, because, like you say, that's the orientation and the proportions of the site. So it wouldn't be identical, yeah, that's right, but it would be to take that, so having, what appears here is sort of big houses with garages, which I think what they've tried to do on the other side of the road is try and make the garages may appear as more sort of rural outbuildings. I hope that's answered the question.
Okay, anybody else? No, then we'll go straight to debate. Anybody want to open that one? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Having gone to the site last Friday, the first thing that I picked up from what the officer said, obviously, is the recommendation is refusal on a technicality, and those have been raised today. There's no point in me going through them again. What I didn't pick up until today is they're being built north-facing, so the gardens will in fact be south-facing. Yeah. So the trees which didn't particularly excite me, if they were to be replaced, and from what I hear from the developer, that would be acceptable, and they're willing to take on the conditions that certainly seems reasonable to everybody who's spoken here in favour of it, I would say that it was, and I think the site will take 4 houses. They will be of they'll be of generous proportions. Nobody's spoken against it, and quite frankly, I wouldn't be unhappy. I get the farmstead design, but where it is, I love that word pastiche. I think it's just wonderful. Thank you. I've slipped that back into my lexicon. And I'd be more than happy to live in one of the houses, to have them as my neighbour, and I think that it is possibly over egging the pudding to try and make them that farmstead design. And let's face it, what is currently on the site will never win any prizes for aesthetics, so it's got to be an improvement on that. So I'm minded to go against offer recommendations based on the fact that if the trees are replaced, so that we don't find ourselves with a situation we had in Breton where trees are starting to be felled or whatever, if they're managed now, then decent sized south-facing gardens replaced by much nicer and healthier trees, I think would be only a benefit to the village and its location. Thank you.
Councillor Hogg.
From the previous item, I said that normally my default position would be to go with council officers, apart from where I feel that there was a good case put for not doing so. I think that this is essentially one of those cases where there has been a really good case put forward. We've got a situation where the parish council, obviously very active, obviously very caring when it comes to planning within their village, are happy for this to go ahead. There hasn't been a single objection in a village that is one where they do care about how their village looks and the impacts of any development are on that village. So I think it's entirely proper that they should put forward this thing about the roof tiles and TPOs for the trees, and I think that can be delegated to officers to sort out the crossing of the T's and the dotting of the I's in that regard. I think that for buildings, the parish council are quite happy with that. They're the ones that are going to have to live with it. It certainly looks like a really good development for me. They say that you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, but you can if you knock it down and start again. And I think that's exactly what they're doing here, is that they're using a brownfield site, and that's a big tick for me. I like to see land that has already been reused in a way that is to the betterment of the local environment. And I think that this is a prime example of that. So brownfield sites are always good for me. The fact that we've got only praise for this, not just the idea of the development, but also the people that are looking to develop. The fact that they've done everything, they've come to the parish council, they've talked to the parish council, they've adapted their plans. Even now, today, they've said yes, we'll take on board the roof tiles, etc. So it ticks all the way. So as far as I'm concerned, I would be more than happy to approve this application.
Councillor Hiller.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I completely agree with the previous commentary, especially Councillor Jones. I think that it is a particularly, or can be, could be, would be, will be, a particularly attractive redevelopment of this site. I made a point when I was questioning the applicant and Mr. Machen, the builder, Mr. Machen, the Hereward homes have got track history. They are a high quality builder, and I think as Aylesworth is within my ward, and thank you for the compliments about the village, Councillor Hogg. If the parish council are supporting this, and it appears certainly it's full support from the Parish Council. It fits within the neighbourhood plan, the recently adopted neighbourhood plan, with 97% support. The tree issues, certainly I feel we can leave to councillors, to officers, to talk to the applicant about that, and certainly I have no real problems with this. It is unfortunate that perhaps we disagree, going to disagree with our conservation officer, but of course design is always subjective, and I think the farmstead appearance is probably inappropriate. We've used the word pastiche several times, and I completely agree. I think it would be a pastiche and almost look contrived. I don't see how else you would develop this site, frankly, other than that opposite linear at right angles to the existing linear development. I'm not sure how you would develop that site any other way. It's an oblong site. They're reasonable sized properties, and I'm sure that they would fit quite nicely into that development. So I will, on this occasion, be supporting a proposal against the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I've got a proposal then from somebody. Who wants to put that forward? Councillor Hiller?
As I've said, Chair, my proposal would be to go against the officer's recommendation for this application, with the condition, the conditionality, I shall say, that I've outlined. And if you wanted to repeat and reiterate, then I'm more than happy to accept that. Thank you, Chair.
Do you need some clarification? Yeah, can do. Yeah, if you say that.
Yeah. So, Councillor Hiller, would you be willing to delegate the conditions to officers, or do you want to sort of specify which ones we need to include, and then we could take, there's things like there's an archaeology condition recommended and things like that, so the usual conditions that we would apply. How do you best to deal with it?
Certainly the usual conditions and the additional conditions that we've talked about, and I guess rather than conditioning as a negotiation with regard to roof materials, tree TPOs, tree management generally, landscaping plan, etc., as we've already, I'm more than happy to leave that to officers to talk to the applicant about that and agree.
Okay.
That's fine.
Okay, so that's clear.
Thank you.
Second, Councillor Hussain this time. All those in favour? That's a unanimous decision. So the application is approved. Thank you. All happy to crack on, straight on? Yes? Yes, yeah, when you're back in your seat. Thanks, Amanda. Thank you.
Is it all right if Councillor Brand has a quick 5 minutes?
We'll have to.
Comfort break, if
otherwise
that's
you can't
okay.
sit, so we'll have to give 5 minutes. Yes.
Is
So
that
if you
okay?
do want to go now. Then we will break for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Please don't discuss anything though with anybody. Right. We will do a 5-minute break.
Okay, that's all right.
Yeah. Good so far. Good debate.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
The committee's going to be quite clear about why it's deciding to deviate from officer opinion or
Mr Moore to present this one, please.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. So this application is made under the advertisement regulations, and it's an application to display an internally illuminated advert on the side of a building measuring 3.2 metres by 1.6 metres and 200 millimetres in depth. And it's as I said, it's an illuminated advertisement. It's one of these digital type of adverts that you may have seen around, and the description says that it will display static images which will change every 10 seconds. So it won't be the same image displayed all the time. It'll be one of these that you sometimes see at bus stops where they change intermittently, but it won't be moving, it'll be static images. There has been a previous refusal last year for a similar advertisement which was slightly bigger. This was 3.6 by 1.2, which is slightly narrower, 0.4 of a metre narrower. Sorry, I'll say that again, I got that a bit twisted. So the current advertisement is 0.4 metres less in width than what was previously refused, and that was refused on the grounds of it being adding to the cumulative clutter of adverts that are already there in the street scene. Next slide, please. So this is the site. It's on the corner at the junction with Alma Road and Lincoln Road, and this is right in the commercial heart of the Millfield area of the city. Next slide, please. And this is an aerial image showing the site outlined in red. Next slide, please. Now this one shows the building. It's on the end of a building. The image on the left shows the building as existing. So you've got an upper floor window and an existing non-illuminated advert on the right-hand side. And the image on the right shows the proposed advert covering that window and most of that upper floor elevation. Next slide, please. And this image shows the depth of the advertisement, 200 millimetres, and it's showing it being divided into a number of LED modules, although when the advert is displayed it won't obviously look like a grid like that, but that's just a technical drawing to show you how it works. Next slide, please. So onto some photographs. So this is looking sort of southeast from Lincoln Road onto the side of the building. The advert will be on the upper floor elevation of that building, above where it says King Cars, covering that window and not the entirety but quite a lot of the area of the upper floor there. Next slide, please. Now this is the other elevation of the building. The only thing you would see of the advert from there is the 200 millimetre projection on the side of the building. Next slide, please. The next few photographs are to illustrate the general character of the area. As I said, it's in the commercial heart of Millfield. There's lots of shops and businesses in the area, a lot of signage, and the building in the centre of the picture there particularly has almost the whole elevation covered in signage. And there's lots of street furniture as well, CCTV cameras, bollards, signage, things like that. Next slide, please. And that's just looking northwards or northwestwards up Lincoln Road. Next slide, please. Now that's looking in the opposite direction, south along Lincoln Road. Again, there's, as you can see, lots of commercial premises, lots of adverts already in place. Next slide, please. Is that the last one? Okay. Right, so key issue here, the advert regs are slightly different from the way we deal with planning applications. It's kind of a light touch regime, and there's only 2 issues that we as a council can consider, and they are public safety and amenity. Public safety in practice usually means highway safety. Is it likely to be a distraction for motorists? Is it likely to be confusing in terms of its proximity to traffic signals, for example, or signage? Is it physically likely to endanger pedestrians or traffic? In terms of highway safety or public safety, we don't have any objection from the Highways Authority on this one, and they've given quite a comprehensive response as to why they don't believe there's any highway safety issues. However, in terms of amenity, and in practice this generally means visual amenity, it can also mean noise as well, but there's no noise which will be created by this advert. So in this case we're only looking at visual amenity. How does it sit with the street scene? Is it acceptable, or is it detrimental to the character of the area? So in this case, as illustrated by the photographs, the area already has lots and lots of street clutter, adverts that already exist, street furniture, etc. And officers in this case considered that it just tips over that, tips over to being not acceptable. Cumulatively, it's just a little bit too much, and it's therefore detrimental to the character of the area in terms of visual amenity. So in conclusion then, the recommendation is to refuse.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. I'll call on Councillor Bashir, please. Good afternoon, Councillor Bashir.
Good afternoon.
You have five minutes when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, thank you, officers, and thank you, councillors. And you all look different from this end. I'm supporting this application with local knowledge and also in my role of Cabinet Advisor for Public Health. When I took up this role with the Cabinet Portfolio Holder and with the Public Health team, and most of the councillors here cross-party would have received emails from the comms unit as well, because in this area, during the pandemic, we had high risk area of people with COVID and not adhering to rules. There was a lot of COVID marshals out there as well. And obviously it's a very densely populated area. This, where they're having this on King Cars, the building, it sits on the corner of Park Ward. Right opposite is North, and just literally metres away from Central. There's a lot of footfall and there's a lot of traffic there as well. And it would be nice to have that screen there, especially if you send out local government messages. We've got like City College and the university. This areas, the inner city wards, especially that area, it's got low literacy rates as well, to promote stuff for the wider community. So it would increase literacy, it would increase or help with health, economic and growth. I respect the officer said there's a bit of clutter in that area, but if you're locally from there, Lincoln Road especially, there's a lot of businesses there, a lot of signage there. It would be nice and it would be beneficial to have a screen there to give out messages to members of the public than the council having to spend a lot of money. And at that time we had vans with massive screens with the pandemic messages going up and down there. And I think the officer, I don't know how long these pictures were taken, but you may have missed the building right next to King Cars. There's a grill place and there's a new shawarma place. Now, believe me, I don't know whether recently you lot have driven down there, but it's a massive sign and it's got like sequins in it and it's something from Las Vegas and it's like shining and zimmering. If that's been approved, I mean, believe me, the sequins are shining day and night. I think the business is a takeaway called Sultan. And even initially when I first thought that, and I thought, oh, well, I'm sure somebody's going to have an accident here because it's so shining, glimmering. But the community have taken it in a nice way. It's brought a different look to the area, and other people are, you know, inspiring to have different ideas there. So please, it's a humble request that I feel that even though I respect the officers and their opinions as well, but I feel that the city is growing, is innovative, technology. Boston Council have approved this as well, and I feel that we should approve it and give it a go. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with Councillor Hiller then for questions, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Councillor Bashir. Listening to your address, it was almost as though this was a Peterborough City Council installation that you were talking about. That was the impression I got, rather than a commercial entity to make money for the people that own it. You mentioned provision for community and public messaging. How much within a 24-hour period is allocated to public messaging, Councillor Bashir?
I mean, speaking to Aaron and Imran, obviously from the design agency, that's how I came across them when they've been previously doing local government work. But again, this depends from the comms unit, how much work that they give them to put up for the messages. That's for the comms unit.
So you don't know, there's no specific allocation of time within a 24-hour period. So listening to your answer, if the comms machine at Peterborough City Council were churning out messages, those messages would immediately go on that board. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, this was their commitment, yes.
Anybody else? Councillor Rush.
Good afternoon. You said in your presentation there's a lot of traffic goes to that area. This site is on a bend. Wouldn't you think that if drivers going down that road on the bend would be distracted by such a big sign up on the top and they'd lose their vision of what's in front of them on the road?
Councillor Rush, like I said, that new sign that's gone up on the takeaway, nothing can distract you more than that in that area. And believe me, people slow down and actually quite have a look at it as well. So far, we haven't had any accidents.
We're talking about this application. We're not talking about anything else. My specific question was for this sign.
I don't think it'll be distracting.
Anybody else? Thank you, Councillor Bashir. Okay, for a change, Simon Machin, and we'll have Aaron Henderson to join you, please. Hello, gentlemen. You have 5 minutes when you're ready to address committee.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman and Councillors, for allowing us to have this opportunity. Just to give you a little bit of background, I've had about 20 years in digital innovation. I was one of the first members of a team that sat on the advisory panel which spoke to media owners such as JCDecaux, Viacom, etc. about the distribution of digital screens into the urban environment. Our unit is literally one of several hundreds which are now prolific across the UK. However, ours is significantly smaller. The LEDs that we're proposing to use are 60% more efficient than most on the market. And we've also been liaising with the council in order to understand what we could do from a health perspective and messaging that we can put up on the display. In answer to several of the questions proposed to Shazia, we've already established a line of comms with Amanda Rose and to discuss how we can actually support these messages coming into the environment. And the reason we're looking at that location is because it's actually quite a hard to reach demographic. So it's quite important that messages are uploaded and displayed to this target audience, of which we can do remotely. I think one of the messages that were put across from Amanda, whilst they're talking with people such as JC Deco, it often takes about 6 weeks for those messages to be uploaded. In some cases, with paper and paste billboards, you're having to drive around with a van, road closures, footpath closures, you've got fuel use, you've got 2 people that paper and paste. With this solution, that's not necessary. We can update the information remotely. We're also a design agency, so we can actually help support the council with those messaging to ensure that they're up in a timely manner. There's actually a screen very similar to this, albeit twice the size, that's based in Boston. It's on the road from Spalding coming into the main roundabout, and it's actually mounted on a gable end wall, again, in a very high traffic area. I believe, to cover the councillor earlier's comments regarding traffic, we've already had approval from Highways which indicate that there are no issues with this unit in this proposed location. We're a local design agency. We don't have the resources as JC Deco or Viacom, and there's also a unit very similar to ours, albeit a portrait unit, digital screen, about 100 yards to the left, further down out of Peterborough, doing exactly the same thing, albeit from a larger international business. We're local. Again, I had this experience from working with an international advertiser in my previous position, from which I was made redundant last January. So as a result, looking to bring this type of innovative solution here into Peterborough, working with Amanda Rose, as I mentioned earlier, but also to work with Smart City Solutions to build out a digital kind of strategy for Peterborough, being a city of the future now as opposed to in the future. The units, like I said, we're financing it ourselves, a small business. We're looking to employ staff to help us with this, and it isn't purely a commercial venture. Of course, we need to make money and keep the lights on, but we're working with local businesses to help support new brands, new products, local restaurants, etc., in the area to promote what they're doing. And we can do that, again, within the space of 2 hours, develop adverts for them and then upload them onto the unit. So it's a supportive mechanism really for Peterborough, and again we've chosen this area because it's a hard to reach demographic, but equally it's a commercial business area, highly commercial, you've seen in those other photographs. So we think that the screen would actually set a precedent from an advertising perspective in terms of what we can do as a local agency, but also in support for Peterborough City Council for health messages, etc., which need to be displayed to this location and target audience.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions at all, anybody? Councillor Heller.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Henderson, so from your final comment, I take it that you feel, commercial aspects aside, because it's all about making money as well, let's be honest, it's about bottom line, it's about profit. Do you feel that this installation would set precedent rather than adding to the already high proliferation of huge advertising hoardings in that immediate area? That is my question.
I do believe it will, because when you have a proposition such as this, you can ensure that there's some congruency in terms of the messaging that puts across to that location, which might result in other businesses not actually covering their buildings with vinyl and and large format posters. They could use this solution as opposed to actually defacing existing buildings.
I'm not suggesting profit's a dirty word, don't get me wrong there, but you're now suggesting that other advertising could in fact be channeled through your own particular panel that you wish to erect on this building, yes?
That's correct, yes.
Fine.
That is possible. Yep.
Councillor Brown.
Will there be different languages on there? Because there's so many different languages in that area. I just wonder whether you'll be able to put, Lithuanian, Polish, you name it, Ukrainian perhaps.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we are an official supplier to the council. And some of the work that I used to do back in London at the time was actually in developing these type of solutions whereby digital panels can actually respond to a person that's actually using it by means of actually deploying a specific language. And with it being almost immediate, we can actually produce that content in a language to be displayed to that particular area. So yes, we can do that without the need to go out and remove paper and paste, etc. It can all be done remotely.
Okay, as long as everybody heard that all right, but obviously if the dogfight keeps going, please get nearer the mic. Who did I have next? Councillor Jones, did you say you wanted to speak?
Thank you, Chair. If you advertise on local radio, then it's considerably cheaper to advertise during the evening or night time than it is during the day. You've obviously made great play of the connections with the City Council, so that presumably in an effort to, gain income and make money from it, how would that affect the way that the messages are portrayed, irrespective of the language or the message? Then, and it's just purely a question on the board being there. If you're advertising on local radio, as I say, the peak time would be 7 till 10 or whatever. How do you see that working for you in that location?
Yeah, I think specifically for us, again, with us being a design agency, we're able to offer brands, businesses, the access to a creative company that can actually understand their business and display a message at the right time, in the right location, with the right design. You don't often get that with radio. You don't forget that with TV, to be fair, and you certainly don't get it with magazines, because often or not you'll read it and you'll throw it away. Whereas this has more of a point to be a turnkey approach to the city. It's also in line, hopefully, with the smart digital strategy that we're looking to implement here in Peterborough anyway. So we're looking to enhance brands, as I mentioned earlier, to have some congruency with messaging and have day part messaging as well, which can be activated remotely. So for example, if there's a message that needs to be put out at 2 o'clock, we can actually designate the frequency of that advertisement to be put out at 2 o'clock.
Yes, I'm conscious we don't get into the Dragon's Den thing here about selling it.
No,
we
just
are going on planning.
Just to follow.
You're doing a good job, don't worry. But what I'm saying is it's a planning thing we're talking about.
Just to follow on from that. So, for instance, yes, there's council messaging, etc. All I'm saying is would commercial considerations therefore override? Councillor Bashir and you have made great play of the link with Amanda Rose and PCC, but you've got to make a scratch out of it as well.
That's absolutely true. And to answer your question, we've designated 10% of the slots available for the council. So regardless of what commercial activity we're running, there is guaranteed slots for the council to be sending out those messages.
Yeah, it is relevant now. Councillor Hogg.
Thank you. You've just answered my first question, which was what percentage would be made available to the council. It's 10%. My other question, which I don't think has been answered yet, is what kind of power usage does this use compared to a normal billboard?
60% less power. So often or not, most of the advertising panels that are run by the major international brands are Samsung LEDs. And they do drink up the juice, whereas we've been looking specifically to ensure that the sustainability element of what we're doing as a practice, as a business, is high on our agenda. So the panels that we're using are 60% more efficient than those which you would predominantly see throughout the UK.
Okay, but what is the power usage of the sign?
That would vary upon the amount of ads that are actually ran, but we would obviously keep a specific amount of advertising running. It's hard to give you a figure in kilowatts, for example, of what that advertising would be, but I can guarantee the fact that the panels that we're using are designed specifically to reduce the flow of electricity, the usage of electricity to those panels.
So what you're saying is it depends on what you're showing, depends on how much?
So literally, if the panel's running constantly for a 24-hour period, for example, we're still maintaining a 60% reduction in energy compared to those that are running currently across the UK.
This is like for like, as opposed to a board with a plastered advertisement with just.
No. This is actually exactly the same as panels that are digital.
Yeah. So I'm talking about compared to a traditional billboard setup with lighting.
Yeah.
How much more power does it use than one of those traditional setups?
I can't give you that comparison, unfortunately. However, I can say that by using a digital panel, you don't need to change the copy every 2 weeks. You don't need two men in a van to go out and change that copy, and you also don't need to be printing out additional paper to reinstall that paper and paste. And then and also there's maintenance of the billboards as well. I think
I'm not sure any of this is relevant. I'm sorry, none of this is relevant. This is all nice to know, but it's not very good for planning. So can we leave that and move on to the next question?
Yeah.
We're not asking them what the power usage is. That's not for us to decide. Okay, well, he couldn't get the answer. So. Councillor Hiller.
Thank you. You mentioned 24 hours a day running, which is the potential, as a normal billboard would be there for 24 hours a day. I get that. Have you given any consideration into the light pollution for neighbouring properties? I'd imagine 1 or 2 or 3 or maybe 30 of those shops in that area directly affected by that light. Very efficient light, as you were saying, very bright, one assumes. Residential properties, how much consideration have you given to that?
Well, that's partly why we chose that area, because it's mostly commercial. And a lot of those window boxes, if you like, which are on the front of the buildings, actually run brighter than what this screen would do. But also there is a parameter by which, from advertising consent, that the knittings of the value of the light actually runs below that parameter. So I think that falls within the scope of what's acceptable.
Good. Anybody else? No, thank you. Excellent. I think we're all going to buy one by the sounds of it. Okay, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Simon? Debate. Questions to officers regarding this? Yeah. Councillor Hiller and Councillor Hall.
Yeah, just a quick question to highways. You've unequivocally stated here that you see no problems whatsoever with any motorists citing that when people are driving down that particular stretch of road, they're driving very slowly anyway, so they're obviously very conscious about what's going on the road. You feel that distraction, and it will be a distraction, let's be honest, it's the level of distraction. You're saying that's acceptable as far as you're concerned, no hazard whatsoever?
Thank you for your question, Councillor Hiller. I can confirm that it meets the advertising guidance in terms of luminance levels, and it will be in keeping with the rest of the advertisements in that area. So I can confirm it won't be a risk to highway safety.
Councillor Hogg.
Yeah, it was just a clarification really in terms of signage. Am I right in saying that there is different rules for, so for instance the picture we've got here, the King Cars sign is a lit sign, in fact maybe all 3 of them are lit, but you've got lit signs, then you've got just signs that aren't lit, and they have different rules according to the level of luminosity, or for want of a better word. Is that correct?
So it's a really good question. The advertising, or the advertisement regs are notoriously complicated and difficult to understand, but I'll try and give you a simplified overview. So there are some adverts which don't require any consent at all. Anybody can do it any time. There are some which are described as having deemed consent, which means that yeah, you can go ahead and do them, but the council can, if they decide, can require them to be removed. And there are those which require express consent, in other words, an application to the council, such as this one. And I can't really go through in detail what does and what doesn't require consent, but generally speaking, illuminated adverts do require express consent, which is why this one required an application. But another complication of the advert regs is if express consent is granted, it's only for 5 years, but it can be kept in place beyond that 5 years if the council's happy with it, but the council, if they so decide, can require it to be removed after 5 years. So it's different from your normal planning applications, Does that make any sense?
So my next question is, do we anticipate that if this application is successful, there will be possibly other applications for similar type changing displays coming forward in that area? And, you know, are we... Yeah.
It's possible. We can't say for certain whether there will or there won't be. It's a type of advertisement which is relatively new, so we're seeing more and more of them coming forward. So there's a possibility. But as I said earlier in my presentation, there's only two things we can take into account. That's public safety and amenity. And when we're looking at amenity, visual amenity particularly, we have to look at the cumulative impact. So by granting permission for one of these types of adverts, it doesn't necessarily open the door for a, you know, free-for-all.
Sorry, are you following on? Yeah?
It's another question, but this one for the highways officer, if that's okay.
Yeah, okay.
It's a question, I suppose, really in two parts. First of all, this area, I'm relatively familiar with it. A friend of mine had a business just on the opposite side of the road to this. It's my understanding that road is quite complicated. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of junctions involved. What is the amount of accidents that have, you know, is it a kind of a high area for accidents for that kind of piece of for a normal road, as it were? Is it a higher risk of accidents happening? And secondly, the question I have is that with a normal traditional sign, it is a static sign, and okay, when this goes up, it's new, people notice it for the first time, etc., etc. But after a while, you just kind of switch it off because it's as it was last week and the week before. Whereas if you have a sign that is constantly changing, it may well be that as you're coming towards that junction, specifically if you're coming south on Lincoln Road, towards that junction with Alma Road, if the sign suddenly changes, that could distract a driver to think, oh, what's that? And then therefore increase the risk of them not being particularly paying attention to that road junction. So the question I'm asking is there a higher risk than normal on that road? And if so, the fact that you're now introducing something that may increase the risk of somebody being distracted, is that going to be a recipe for disaster?
Thank you for your questions, Councillor Hogg. So if I deal with the first question, highway safety, we consider the sign to comply with the advertising regulation. So because of that, we do not consider it to pose any risk or adverse risks to highway safety. So there will probably there'll be a number of accidents that have taken place along that road, but I do not consider this sign to pose a material risk to highway safety or result in a material increase in accidents along that road. There's already a proliferation of advertisements along that road, and this will be, as you've already alluded to in your sort of second part of your commentary there, people just get used to it. You've got all the JC Deco signs on the side of bus stops. They're constantly changing, but you just accept them as part of bus stop infrastructure nowadays. And the Institute of Lighting Professionals, the guidance is quite strict in terms of how many advertisements can change in a space of time. I think it's 10 or 15 seconds is the rate of change that's permitted. And then the other important factor is luminance levels, because in the daytime most motorists won't notice that sign, or it will just be in keeping with the rest of the signs. Is at night time, when the luminance levels, that's where it can pose an unacceptable level of distraction to a motorist, but that's controlled by the sort of the technical detailing for the sign, and that needs to be kept at a certain level so it doesn't dazzle motorists. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Councillor Hiller.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Excuse my ignorance on these signs, but is it a moving image, or is it a static image that moves, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
The information that I've got in front of me that's been input into the report and submitted with the application says that it's not moving images. They're static images, but they change every 10 seconds.
Yes, completely.
Okay, that's all we got to do, yeah. Anybody else? Just what I hate to push the point, well I don't actually, Alex, sorry, highways point of view, we've recently had a change to the highway code, haven't we, which gives pedestrians priority at these sort of junctions. So if I was a car coming up, I'm not a car, but I was in a car, coming up Lincoln Road, heading towards town on this bit, so I come to this sort of bit here and somebody's going to cross just there, I have to give way under the new highway code to that pedestrian crossing, just there. Has that been taken into account that I might be looking up there? Because, are you with me? Everybody understand what I mean? That road there, pedestrian has right of way if they're crossing under the new rule, don't they? So,
talking about the formal crossing or the informal crossing?
No, if you were crossing that junction there,
Yes.
Alma Road,
Yes.
and I wanted to turn in, I've got to let the pedestrian cross.
Under the new hierarchy
Yes.
of road
So
users,
that's where I'm coming from. So, as that, I know you're going on what all the rules are, but have they now been changed in any way based on the new highway code to the fact that pedestrians now, rather than standing there waiting for me to go, will or could just walk out in front of me?
So you're suggesting you could miss that pedestrian because of this advertisement, and you're...
I'm not suggesting, I'm just saying have you taken into account, because you could be looking up, couldn't you?
A driver's duty of care, you need to drive and concentrate on the road, and that includes pedestrians crossing the road. So if you're looking up at that advertisement and hit a pedestrian, that's you driving without undue care and attention.
I'm fine, but are you happy with that? That somebody would be done for due care and attention, but in the meantime somebody's in hospital?
I'm satisfied that sign does not pose...
right, that's what I'm getting at, that you think it's on balance, it's unlikely to be a problem. Is that all right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Yes, Councillor.
Sorry, Chair, I was just going to mention something in regards to your question, if I may. If you're in a left-hand drive car, you might see the sign. If you're in a right-hand drive, unless you've got the roof down or the sunroof open, you won't see it at that junction.
Well, I'm in a car here and I can see it.
No, that's facing the...
that faces the road. You come up the road, it's right in front of you.
That picture there is taken as if you were walking across the road, but if you were driving, you'd be driving to the left of it.
No. If I was in a car, you're standing on Lincoln Road here, aren't you?
They're facing the building.
Who took that picture? Oh, not that picture, that picture. You must have been standing.
Yeah, you're standing on the footpath.
I'm afraid it wasn't me who took the
across the road. If you're driving, it's next to you on the left. Right? Yeah, further back. Yeah.
Have we got one a bit further back? I want to turn, yeah. No, none of them. It's going to be none of them, isn't it?
If you If you go back...
Right.
There.
Yeah.
I can't show you because I haven't got a screen to put it on, have I?
So if you turn in left, Chair, the building's on your left-hand side.
Yeah,
it's
but
not in front of you.
the face there is facing straight down, almost straight down Lincoln Road, isn't it?
Yeah, but you'd have to be driving a limousine if you're going to run someone over. I mean, it's a long way away. What I'm saying is the face of the building is facing the road. If you were turning left at Alma Road, the building is on your left-hand side. It's not in front of you.
Right. Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm with you where you come from.
Yeah.
I'm with you. I just want to be sure that it's been taken into account. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions? No. Debate. You'd like to start that? Oh, sorry. Yes, Phil.
Just having listened to some of the questions earlier, I just think I need to make it clear that I reiterate that the only two things we can consider are public safety and amenity. Yeah. We can't consider the content of the adverts, power usage and things like that. I mean, that is spelt out in pretty clearly in the advertisement regulations, so I just thought I'd make that clear.
Likewise, if I could also just add to that, that it wouldn't matter what the promises are, you can't condition or guarantee 10% of council time or whatever. So please, if that's gone into your head, please ignore that. There's no way you can condition that, and there's no way they can promise that. So, yes, Councillor Dowson.
Yeah, who is responsible for the cumulative visual effect that if there's only two conditions we have to consider? The site looks, that corner area looks dismal visually, I think. And I think any other councillors in their parish or areas, if that's the sort of thing which was being proposed, they'd condemn it immediately. We used to have 40 or 50 years ago, that area used to have a competition for Christmas displays, the window displays, the local businesses. But I feel that we're just bypassing this. Visually, it looks shocking, and somewhere along the line, we should be looking at these areas with a little bit more hope and aspiration for a better environment than that visual shock, which I feel should be a consideration.
We're into debate then, I assume. Is there any more questions for officers before I move on? Councillor Hiller, are you going to debate or are you questioning? Right, let's go to debate then, okay? It's your turn now, yeah.
Thank you. Given this a lot of thought, actually, it was interesting to go up on Friday with the site visit, and I don't think anybody could be under any illusions that it's a very, very colourful, cluttered area, and probably one of the most densely populated in terms of advertising shop fronts. And that photograph, I think, of the shop opposite, it was like a shop billboard. I mean, it's huge. Personally, and I may be a lone voice here, personally, I think this is probably too much. I think it's opening a door to an advertisement which is illuminated, and I fully get there are shop fronts with lighting behind them, whatever, but they are static. They're static and they're above shop doorways and windows and whatever. And I've listened to some of the commentary that, once you've seen it for, a static sign for a period of time, then it just becomes part of the furniture. I actually would consider very seriously what Councillor Dowson has just said, and it is, in my opinion, all about quality of the environment and loving where you live, and trying to protect the amenity, not only of the people that live in that area, but also the people that are visiting and driving through. And I think you touched on the point, Chair, that if this is a changing sign, and I was very conscious about whether it was a moving sign or a static sign that moved, and I hope the difference was appreciated. I'm sure it was. If I'm driving and a pedestrian has stepped off the curb and that sign suddenly changes, just the nature of its changing would oh, what's that? And there is the potential, and I did ask our highways officer, senior highways officer, whether there was, in his opinion, any risk whatsoever that was acceptable, and his answer was yes, it is an acceptable issue. It complies with X, Y, Z, therefore it's okay. I think it's a little bit more than that, and it isn't just the sheer size of this thing, which is huge. It is the fact that it's just a thin end of the wedge, I think, for the potential. And I appreciate that we're looking at what's in front of us now, not what could come along, but the thin end of the wedge for the potential of what could happen, not just in this area of the city, not just in this densely populated area, but around the city. So I will be, unless somebody can convince me otherwise, I will be accepting our officer's recommendation and refusing this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hussain.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. So I grew up around this area, and I do drive quite regularly on this road as well as the Glinton Road in Helpston. It's not the only thing I do. So you would see this sign coming, as you said, driving down towards it. Turning into the road, I accept the officers, about the highway safety. I don't think there is an issue there. I think you'll see it when you drive north as you've passed it, and you've got a long way as you're coming towards it. On the site visit, there was, if you stand on that corner, you'll see across, as was mentioned, that the shop across the road has got a plethora of signs, but in the window it's actually got an electrical, obviously a big TV display. There's hairdressers there with swirling signs. Next door now, as Councillor Bashir mentioned, there's a restaurant which has got the sort of glitter sign. So there's a whole array of, visual impact in that area as you're driving through. The traffic, whenever I've gone through there, is always slow. So there's pedestrian fixed sort of areas for pedestrian crossing just past there where the TSB used to be to cross Lincoln Road. So yeah, highway safety for me isn't an issue. I'm hoping that with a sign like this, I know you, Chair, did mention that we can't talk about or accept that there'll be any allowance for council, like you said about the 10%. But with the mixed density of populations from various backgrounds and having canvassed in that area, I can tell you that there's probably best part of 40 different languages that are spoken within that area. And with the last couple of years with COVID, trying to get messages out to those people, that was one of the hotspot areas for people, not social distancing and stuff, and trying to educate people in that area meant leaflets of different languages, and it was a task in itself. So had that sign been there at the time, I would say that it would have been a lot easier, a lot simpler to get that message across for health reasons. So that's probably one of the benefits I would see of it. The other one I would say is maybe there would be a reduction in all the other billboards, as there'd be, and hopefully an improvement in the quality of the other signs within the area. So I'll be against officers' recommendation on this one and voting for it.
Who else? Anybody else going into the debate? Councillor Hogg?
Thank you, Chair. There you go. So I have to agree with Councillor Hiller. I think, as I said previously, that I know this area fairly well. A friend of mine had a business just opposite, and I spent quite a lot of time there when he was first starting up to help him with setting up his business. And it seems to me that, as has already been commented on, that there is, a plethora of different advertising signs up and down the street, and it's almost, dare I say it, it's a sort of competition for people's attention, and that I think that if this application is successful, I think that there will be an element of people jumping on the same bandwagon, looking to instigate these changing signs as opposed to ones that just are static. And as Councillor Hill has said, that I think it's not the brightness, it's not the size of the advertisement that is going to be particularly drawing people's attention, but the fact that it's gone from one colour to another, especially if it's gone from bright to dark, dark to bright, it's going to draw your eye, and maybe not so much the junction of Alma Road, but slightly north of that there is a kind of informal pedestrian crossing. It's not a zebra crossing. There's a kind of island where you can walk across the road and then wait for the traffic coming south and before them continuing across the road. And as is previously said, that you've got a situation where there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of people on the street, on the pavement. An added distraction of an advertisement of this ilk with changing lights, it could be the element that takes the attention of otherwise normal driver away from the road and could cause some sort of accident. So I'm very much mindful of supporting officers. I don't want to kind of come across as a bit of a Luddite, not accepting new technologies, and I do take on board the fact that this is probably the way forward. But I think something that's changing on such a regular frequency is going to cause some sort of distraction, rather than something that maybe is static normally and then is just changed once a week or even every day. At the beginning of the day, I would be more accepting of that because there would be less distraction involved.
Councillor Jones.
As the saying goes, indecision may or may not be my problem. This is an odd one for me because two things. There's only two things planning can take into consideration: public safety, and then you talk to highways and say, well, from a road user point of view, there isn't a problem with public safety. As a former driving instructor, this is a very, very busy piece of road, and it's just one more piece of the mosaic. If you can get up and down there safely at busy times without somebody jumping out or doing a U-turn on you, then I think, quite frankly, a sign on the side of the road is the least of your problems. I share, and the other thing, as well as a councillor has said on a previous thing, gentlemen, it's Lincoln Road. I think if this was anywhere else, I'd probably more of an open and shut case. What I'm mindful of is what I call the law of unintended consequences, is if we approve this, what happens next? And will that be to our taste, etc.? I'm all for enterprise. I'm all for somebody trying to make some money out of a location that is already cluttered. So I don't share the concerns over highway safety. I actually think it's fine. If you want my honest opinion, as a road user, there's so much going on that road. This isn't going to add to it materially, in my opinion. What do I think of it otherwise? It's the kind of thing, if there's a possibility that this could be given a trial run, then I'd be 100% behind it, so that it may assuage some people's concerns. But even then, I'm minded to go against officer recommendations simply because of its location, where it is, and the fact that I don't think it poses any greater risk than anything that already exists in that very, very busy and visually cluttered area. Thank you.
Councillor Hussain.
Sorry, I just wanted to add, one of the officers at the start of the address mentioned it's a similar sort of thing to bus stop, the signs you get in bus stops, which are right next to the road. So I'm guessing if they're, for me as a driver, I've seen them, they don't distract me, so I'm giving my personal opinion here. If they're not a distraction and they're right next to the road, I can't see how a similar sign on a building further up is going to do that. So yeah, I just wanted to add that as a point.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hiller.
Probably because it's about 4 times the size, I should think. You seem to be forgetting, but possibly on purpose, Councillor Hussain, that it's about 10 foot wide, and it's up high. Bus signs aren't, and they're not. And the idea of an advert is to distract. That's the idea of an advert, is to distract. Let's not make too fine a point of that. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else want to come on debate? No? Shall we go for anybody got a proposal? Ooh, Councillor Hiller.
As you might expect, my proposal, Chair, is that we accept the officer's recommendation and refuse.
I'm taking it, Councillor Hogg, you're seconding. All those in favour? Six. Against? That might surprise you. 4. Any abstentions? No, there wouldn't be, would there? So what's it, 6-4?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so that is 6-4, 4 against to go with officer recommendation and refuse the application.
Okay, so the application is refused. Thank you very much. Right, everybody, that's the end of, or basically the end of the meeting. Could I wish you all the luck, those that are standing and those that are not, who are helping out for the upcoming elections, and hopefully we'll see most of you back and none of you will fall foul. Thank you very much to officers. Thank you everybody for your work today and in the past, and we'll see what happens, like I say, in June. I think is the next actual one, isn't it? I think. So we'll see who's on there in June.
And thank you for your